Hello and welcome to our viewers joining us from all around the world and here in the US. I'm Linda KINKADE. Just ahead this hour, Ukraine's president says a lasting peace is achievable after speaking with Donald Trump, who agrees that they had a good call. The Federal Reserve expects slower growth and higher inflation amid rising uncertainty from Trump's tariffs. And baseball superstar Shohei Ohtani hits his first home run of the season as the Dodgers sweep the Cubs in Japan. We begin with the war in Ukraine. President Trump had an hour-long phone call with Ukrainian President Zelensky today, saying much of the discussion was based on the call that happened yesterday with President Putin in order to align both Russia and Ukraine in terms of their requests and needs. He added that we are very much on track. The White House press secretary then read a statement by the Secretary of State Marco Rubio and the National Security Advisor Michael Waltz.
President Zelensky asked for additional air defense systems to protect his civilians, particularly Patriot missile systems, and President Trump agreed to work with him to find what was available, particularly in Europe. The two leaders also agreed on a partial ceasefire against energy. Technical teams will meet in Saudi Arabia in the coming days to discuss broadening the ceasefire to the Black Sea on the way to a full ceasefire.
Ukraine and Russia are blaming each other for attacks that happened just after President Vladimir Putin agreed to temporarily halt attacks on energy infrastructure. A readout from the White House said Putin had agreed to stop attacks on energy and infrastructure. Well, the Ukrainian military official in Kharkiv says there has been a new wave of Russian attacks just moments ago, damaging critical infrastructure. Well, joining me now is former U.S. Ambassador to Ukraine, William Taylor. Good to have you with us, Ambassador.
Thank you, Linda. Thanks. Good to be here.
So this time yesterday, the White House said that Putin would pause attacks on energy and infrastructure for 30 days. That didn't even last one day. Of course, we know that Russia has struck both energy and other infrastructure, including a hospital. Has Trump been played by Putin?
Not yet, Linda. Not yet. We'll see if there is a response by the United States to these actions. It is very clear that to the Ukrainians that this is not a surprise. This is what Russians do. They sign ceasefires and then they violate them. This has been the experience of the Ukrainians in Donbass since 2014, when as many as 17 ceasefires were agreed, only to be violated by the Russians. So this is not a surprise for the Ukrainians. And there has to be a strong response from the United States if we're going to be credible in making this ceasefire work.
And Putin also told Donald Trump that to prevent an escalation, there would need to be an end of military support for Ukraine. After Zelensky spoke with Trump today, we heard from Zelensky saying that lasting peace can be achieved. What's it going to take?
It's going to take security. It's going to take security, and that is likely going to be provided, the security force likely to be provided by Europeans. And so the British and the French and probably 18 or 19 other European nations and others are putting together a force that can provide security and be sure that the Russians cannot invade again, cannot break the ceasefire, cannot violate the ceasefire. So that security is going to be the key to having a good ceasefire. And the Russians don't get a say. The Russians don't get to say yes or no to any kind of a European security force.
Putin's call with Trump lasted 2 hours with translation, but Putin made Trump wait an hour for that call. What does that tell you, Ambassador, about the power play here?
So you're right, Linda. This is what Putin does. He does this to other nations and other national leaders. We remember very famously doing it to Angela Merkel. President Trump will demonstrate that he's got the cards, that he's got the influence, that he's got the leverage on Putin. Putin's economy is weak other than the military side. Military side, yes, is going gangbusters, but the rest of the economy is fragile. And there are things that the United States with the Europeans can do to make the Russians feel that pain. And that's likely what it's going to take, as well as providing the Ukrainians with the weapons they need to defend themselves. And so the conversation about Patriot missiles today was an encouraging sign.
And we know, Ambassador, that Russia is already heavily sanctioned. Talk to us about what else could happen. We know that talks will happen this weekend between the US and Russian officials in Saudi Arabia. What are the next steps?
On the sanctions, there are sanctions that continue to be available. There are additional sanctions on banks. There are a couple of banks that haven't yet been sanctioned. The oil industry in Russia is vulnerable, and they have been getting around the sanctions by using this shadow fleet of oil tankers to move around, and that can be cracked down. There's also a price cap on oil. Right now, it's $60 a barrel. That can be lowered. So there's about $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves that have been frozen that can be seized. These reserves, this money, $300 billion, European banks, some American banks, and that can be seized as well. So there are economic steps that can be taken to put pressure on Putin to abide by the ceasefire, a full ceasefire, by the way, which is not what Putin has agreed to. He only agreed to this partial one, whereas President Trump and President Zelensky had agreed on a broad ceasefire.
Right. And in terms of the next steps, given that talks are meant to happen this weekend, they don't involve Ukraine, but they do involve officials from Russia and from the US. What needs to happen?
It's not clear to me, Linda, that the Ukrainians will not participate in these things. They may not be three-way conversations. There may be conversations between the United States and Ukraine and the United States and Russia. But yes, what needs to happen is agreement on how to enforce and how to implement this partial ceasefire. And I think Secretary Rubio's statement indicated that that was going to be a step toward discussion of a Black Sea ceasefire. There's a ceasefire in the Black Sea, and which is another step toward a full ceasefire, which again, Zelensky and Trump have agreed to and Putin has not. But those are the next steps that have to happen.
All right, we will see how things play out over the coming days. Ambassador William Taylor, great to have you on the program. Thanks so much.
Linda, thanks for having me.
Ukraine and Russia conducted one of the largest prisoner exchanges of the war so far. They each swapped 175 prisoners. Moscow released an additional 22 severely wounded Ukrainian troops. President Zelensky thanked the UAE for brokering that deal, saying, quote, "We are grateful to all our partners, especially the United Arab Emirates, for making today's exchange possible."